who say if you're not talking about gender, like you can't really have any understanding about anything else. You have to center gender. Gender is the same thing happens around race. I just want to own, for me, I don't think that approach is actually helpful, because I think, for me, it is not. They are interconnected, but it is very easy to get into what some people call oppression Olympics. If you actually like look for the cards to play around class or race or gender or heteronormativity or et cetera, and then you end up in some sort of weird competition around who is more fucked in this system. And pardon me, I just realized I do that sometimes. So. But my mama taught me profanity, use it sparingly, because there's some things that are so profane, that's the right word. So here's how I'm going to do it, y'all. And I am going to do it, though, from the meta or the big picture of society. And I am going to start with patriarchy, because I think patriarchy in the world history was really the beginning. My assessment, and if you don't know this story, I want to recommend The Chalice and the Blade by Rianne Eisler. I see several hands nodding. The Chalice and the Blade by Rianne Eisler. She argues, and I believe is accurate, that human beings on planet Earth everywhere basically organize themselves in a cooperative, collaborative manner. In fact, she and other ethnobiologists say we wouldn't even exist if we were not cooperators, because as Homo sapiens and the mammals that we are, we would not have been able to actually survive. And patriarchy is, yes, gendered, especially in this society, but it need not be. That the patriarchal system is one that begins to replace a cooperative system with a competitive one. A power with dynamic with a power over dynamic. And that basically happened about 10,000 years ago. And it took, multiple generations, hundreds of years, but it really ultimately swept across the entire globe, and it impacted and changed the way every society operates in this or on this planet. So that's big picture, the idea of patriarchy. I do, again, want to underscore, it is absolutely gendered, but not exclusively, right? Sometimes I say, so tell me, is Technic-Con less of a feminist than Margaret Thatcher? I mean, and I guess I've aged myself generations. Some of the millennials are like, who is he even talking about? Right? So I should probably think about bringing up some more modern examples. But you get my point, right? Like there are some men who seem to have done the work, or cisgendered males who have done the work, to be able to actually engage in a genuinely sharing, genuinely cooperative kind of a manner. And there are some cisgendered females who are just straight up assholes. Right? And so that's the kind of way. Now, I also, as a cisgendered white male, want to say, I can't help but to notice that it's usually cisgendered white males who are the assholes. So I don't want to lose that part of it, right? But the concept of patriarchy for us is really the idea of domination, power over, competition. And then the next one, and I do this not because one is more important than the other, but my understanding of the big picture of human development. The next one that I want to talk about is imperialism. Because empire, whether it's for me, the English empire as a descendant of the Irish. Anybody other Irish in the crowd? There always are, right? So I have a particular hatred of the English empire, right? Because that's the empire that pushed my people off of the ancestral lands where I once lived, or my people once lived, in connection to Mother Earth in a regenerative kind of way. But the reality is, every empire sucks, right? And every empire actually has a same basic concept, which is to conquer, conquest. Take this power over dynamic, now apply it to land. Apply it to the physical world. And what you see is an immediate otherization, right? So there is the otherization, but as part of that otherization is also the legitimation or the legitimization of being able to steal other people's stuff, make it yours, and then legalize that, right? And you specifically do it around land. And what's especially important to recognize about this notion of empire is it continues to expand, right? Wherever the capital of empire, it goes out and it steals resources. And what does it do with those resources? It brings it to the empire, to the capital, right? That's literally what happens. And here is one little thing that I do want to say, an observation for all of world history. You ready? It can be summed up in 3 words. All empires fall.
That's good. That's good.
That is good, except I want to point this out. Every empire that ever rose ultimately did fall. This one will too, but there's a difference. Every other empire that fell, from the Sumerians to the Mesopotamians, the Aztecs, and by the way, I picked on the English Empire, but every continent saw empire. Look at the world history. Empire has existed everywhere, and it's problematic. But here's my point. Empires fall because the capital goes out, conquers land, steals resources, bring those resources back to the capital, enslaves, oppresses, exploits, but then it's built up, so it has to go out in other places and get 2 more resources to bring them in. And those supply lines have to get larger and larger. It gets built up, and then, in a nutshell, something that anthropologists and others who study this call imperial overshoot happens. Anybody know what imperial overshoot is? It is that moment in time where the supply lines are so large and so far and so long, bringing back and buttressing and supplanting the actual capital of the empire, that it's not sustainable and it implodes. All empires fall because it is an ideology that is ultimately unsustainable. But here's the thing. Every empire that has fallen to date has taken hundreds, sometimes thousands of years for that rise and fall to happen. And there were always survivors. And because it was a slow motion over generation, the survivors basically drifted off into the forest or the savanna or the mountains or the jungles or whatever the biota was, right? And then human beings started again. Here's the point that I want to make, and we got to ground it, and I'm glad that Ruthie started the way she did. This is a global empire. There's no place to go. If we don't learn to dismantle this particular empire that crosses nation states and those imaginary lines on the map called boundaries that don't actually exist, I'm saying the worldview of exploitation and oppression and taking ultimately is going to destroy the planet. Because that's where I want to get into capitalism, and just very quickly a definition. Capitalism is an economic system that is premised upon the idea of the private ownership, not just of personal property like my jacket, your hat, your shoes. It is the private ownership of the property necessary for the means of production that we need to live. It is in absolute contradiction to the idea of the collective communitarian, like we take care of each other collectively. So capitalism as an economic system is premised upon private ownership of the means of production, and that you exploit labor and the natural resources to make a profit. And by the way, you don't have to be a Marxist to have that definition. Well, it helps. But that basic definition you'll find in an introductory economics course. Like that is, in essence, the definition of capitalism. And it comes out of imperialism. And please note, as an economic system, it is literally not only dependent upon exploiting and appropriating both labor and resources, it celebrates it. It says that that is a good thing. And there is an inherent logic. And I got to tell you, just as imperialism will fall, capitalism will fall. Capitalism will end because there are inherent contradictions that cannot be squared. One of them is capitalism, because it is exploiting the natural world, explicitly says there will always be unlimited natural world to exploit. Newsflash! The earth is a closed system. And the reality is that in our... I need to make sure I do this. That's it. I'm not an artist, but I am a storyteller, and I do pay attention to that medium. That's art. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So here's the thing. Because the earth is a closed system. And whether you come at this from hard science or whether you come at this from an eco-spiritual perspective, or like me, you think they're both true, if you look at it that way, what we know is that the way that we are conducting ourselves, and not just this country, but I mean the entire industrialized idea of how we are doing economics, we are literally pillaging Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself. Capitalism is the ideology of cancer. And what happens to the host if the body gets cancer and cancer is not interrupted or ended? What happens to the host? It dies. So I don't know how else to sort of name it other than to just try to be as courageous as possible to name. If we don't interrupt capitalism, I believe that ideology is going to destroy this planet. And I don't tell you for a minute that I have got the absolute thing to do to stop it, but I'll tell you this. I'm going to go down swinging. I am absolutely committed to actually deconstructing this system that seems intent on commodifying the planet and exploiting my sisters and brothers and cousins, and, by the way, other life itself. Capitalism as an economic system will not continue, but if we just let it play itself out, just like imperialism, it will end. And the last interconnected piece is white supremacy. And notice I didn't put that last because it's least important. I put it last because it's the most recent of the oppressions or exploitive kind of worldviews that is actually quite new. Again, there's always been otherization, but the idea of whiteness is actually quite new. Anybody know what country or society created the idea of whiteness? Thank you. America, right? Like a lot of people are like, oh, it goes back. No. Again, there were otherization. But before that, people were English or Scottish or Norwegian, like people who have my pigment. They had an ethnicity or even a nationality. But nobody would have described themselves as white. You know why whiteness was created? This is really interesting. Whiteness was created in this country because the fact is there were many examples of class solidarity amongst indentured servants of European descent, people who look like me, and enslaved Africans who actually said that, and again, there was a difference, like being enslaved was worse than being indentured, but on the whole, they were basically sort of being treated about the same. Not exactly, but the worldview was about the same. And this is really important because there were ongoing rebellions. Because this is what happens. You know what oppressed people always do everywhere on planet Earth? Rebel. Organize. Fight back. That's literally what we do, right? Because you know what? When the boot is on your neck, you can look around and say, the boot is on my neck. The boot's on your neck. I hate this. This sucks. That's what solidarity means right there, right? Not because of some sort of, oh, the boot's not on my neck, it's on your neck, but I feel sorry for you. That's good, that's charity. Solidarity is something different. Solidarity is whenever you can look at somebody and say, I see in your struggle, my struggle, together we can actually win. Let's do the work to find our commonality. That's what real solidarity is. And throughout this country, we were taught, maybe if you're lucky to hear about Nat Turner and his slave rebellion, as if that was the one. Here's the thing. There were hundreds of them. In the beginning of this country. Hundreds of slave revolts. And the one that I want to talk about very quickly is called Bacon's Rebellion. I see a couple of people Bacon's Rebellion is so awesome because what you had is white indentured servants, enslaved Africans coming together, rising up, and it spread across what we now call the Mid-Atlantic. And it looked like they were making a genuine challenge. It was going from rebellion to revolution, specifically around that class system and struggle, and here's what happened. It was, in fact, squash, and the ruling elite, all of whom did, in fact, have pigment that looked like mine, said, oh no, there's way more of them than there are of us. We've got to find a way to divide them. And so the idea of whiteness was actually created in order to divide that. And they said, we're going to raise up those people who we will continue to economically oppress, who look like us, but we'll call them white now. And we're going to lift them up a little bit. Do you think they lifted them all the way up to the ruling class? No. Of course not. I like to tell people all the time who think that whiteness gives them solidarity with the ruling elite. Why don't you go to a country club and knock on the door and say, hey, I ain't got no money, but I'm white. Can I swim in the pool? See how they treat you. But what they did was lifted up and created, and literally under law, the first white privileges legally codified came out of Bacon's rebellion. And they intentionally degraded Africans deeper than they were and really began to pit folks with skin like mine against people with darker skin and pigment from Africa to otherize it and codify it under law. So white supremacy, I don't want to it's important that we recognize that we've got actually to deal with the interconnectedness of all of those things. And so, let me just check real quick. So I've taken 14 minutes, so I'm 4 minutes over, but that is my effort to actually describe the interconnectedness. So what I'm going to do, remember, Tamara's going to come back next, but